The weather was cool. It was another day to go out to look for whoever was going to fall into my trap. Everyone in town knew who I was and were running from me, which caused me to wear a lot of disguises, changing them each time I was going out to do something to prevent people from trying to capture me because they recognized the mask. I had an addiction for girls who looked a certain way, and I didn't even try denying it anymore. The world knew it, and there was no point lying to myself and trying to hide from who I was. Girls with black, straight, and long hair who were slim and barely wore any makeup. I thought I was going crazy until I began to see them walk past me on the streets. I would stare and not be able to get my eyes off them until someone or something brought me back to my senses. I had approached some of them before, and they shunned me. Not once, not twice, and not even 3 times. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just my interest. But when it marked the 20th girl that was going to do it to me, I knew something was going on, and I had to get whatever I wanted, no matter what it was going to take. The first I tried it with was the one I met at Wendy's drive-thru. She was very pretty, prettier than those I had seen on the streets that piqued my interest. I followed her quietly till she was far away from where people were going to notice what I was doing. I wrapped a cloth over her face quickly, covered her mouth, and dragged her with me with my other hand to where I parked my car. Luckily for me, it was close to where I dragged her from. She struggled, but I was stronger than her. Luckily for me, all the other girls had been the kind that my strength conquered. I only enjoyed tying them down and watching them beg me to free them. After I was satisfied, I would release them. My eyes were always hidden behind a mask. None of them knew exactly who I was, but the town was now looking for the psych guy. There was a funny thing that was going on. I was sure there was someone else out there doing the same thing I was doing, because the girls that came out to talk about their experiences were not all those that I actually captured. It was either many girls just coming up to get pity from people, or there really was someone else. In remembrance of the time I did that, I decided to visit Wendy's again and be on the lookout for another girl I wanted to add to my collection. The place was quiet, and most of the girls that walked past me were not those I wanted. I hissed in frustration. I was expecting the day to go better. I noticed another guy just standing in the corner with sunglasses, and his head raised. He was observing things as well. I had to be smart with my move if there was someone else watching the area. Suddenly, my kind of girl walked past me. I followed her, and the guy I had noticed earlier followed me. I ignored it. It could have been that he was just going the same way accidentally, and I tried to get my mind off it. Though something kept telling me to back off from whatever I actually planned to do with the girl, I ignored it. I could not resist the girl now that I had seen her. I kept looking back for the guy, and he was still there, walking at exactly the same pace I was. Suddenly, I felt a push on my back, which made me almost fall. What the heck, man? I turned around. I knew it was the guy, but he was no longer behind me. I turned back to the front, and there he was, already grabbing the girl. I ran to them, pulled the guy to the other side of the road, and grabbed the girl for myself. I lost my balance as soon as the guy got up again. He slapped me hard and tried to grab the girl again. She knew what was happening and was already running for her life. We ran after her, yelling at each other on the way. "She's mine, you moron! I spotted her first," we said at the same time. The look of fear on the girl's face as she ran pushed me to run faster. That was the exact thing I was looking for from a girl. I didn't know what the guy wanted. He tried to slap me again after we lost sight of the girl, but I pushed him to the nearest wall and pinned him there. His eyes were red and murder was written all over it, but I reciprocated it. I could be as crazy as he was, and even more. I picked the pen that was in my pocket and bored the sharp side into different parts of his skin while he screamed. I felt content at the sight and couldn't wait for him to start begging me just so I could tell him that I was better than him and he should not try to take what was mine anymore. Instead, he removed his sunglasses that were still fixed to his face. I wondered how. He broke it against the wall and picked one of the broken glasses to use over my skin. He had no remorse and looked so determined to do it. I tried to free myself, but he pinned me in the same position. "Who is crazy now?" he asked me, and smiled evilly. I struggled to free myself, but it was at that moment that I knew he was stronger than I was, and it was probably the end of the journey for me. Though I was not a believer, I began to say my last prayers as he placed the piece of glass on my skin and tore it in a straight, long line. Blood gushed out and my screams went higher. People had gathered to watch us. The noise must have attracted them. The girl we were chasing after was also there, staring at us with so much confusion. I succumbed and begged him, but he only kept the evil smile on and continued with what he was doing. It was the police siren that broke us up. He left me suddenly, and I fell to the ground. I was weak and knew it was the end for me. As soon as the officers got to where I was, they placed cuffs in our hands. I knew that it must have been the girl who called them. If not, they would have thought I was the victim. The world was going to know who I was now. It had been a long time coming. Whatever had a beginning must surely have an end. I hated the sound of walking footsteps, especially when one dragged their steps. I thought we had already been cursed by humanity to have them drag their terrible footsteps all over the world. I always tried to keep it low, and I would say that I was pretty good at it, considering I no longer saw the old mister who always walked right past my house every evening. A search by the police had showed up nothing either. I leaned back into my reclining seat and watched the sunset. It was beautiful. The world was beautiful. It would have been even more so without humans for whom my hate abounds. There was a fat stick of cigar between my lips, and I puffed the content in, taking a deep breath. I felt the warmth spread through my body before I realized I had shut my eyes to savor the flavor of smoke. Then it came. Oh God, no! My eyes sprang open on their own accord, and in the distance, I found the silhouette of a man against the setting sun. He was walking down the street towards me. I gritted my teeth to prevent myself from shouting at him. Humans had to leave the earth, and one by one, I had to clear out the most annoying ones first. I waited until he came close before I took in his face. He was an old man, frail with a white beard hanging down his chin. On his face, there was an annoying smile, as if he knew what he was doing and was deliberately doing it. I watched him pass. Just before he passed, he stopped, staring right at me, and waved his hand. His eyes, black as night, twinkled just above the wrinkles beneath them. There was no time to make out the meaning of his wave, because he turned around and started walking away. For a few minutes after he walked past, I was stunned. Nobody ever saw me. Ever. That was why it was easy for me to walk into Wendy's and pick the largest hamburger and walk out through the door. I had never been caught, never been seen. Who was he? Every part of my body sprang to life at the same time. I knew I had to get him. I flung the fat stick of cigar away and went after the man. It didn't take me long to catch up with him. He was still dragging his feet and making the most annoying of sounds. As I approached, there was no indication that he could see me. The sound of cars and conversations floated from all sides of the road towards me. The lights were coming on in this part of the city, setting the ground awash with their brightness. I cradled the sharp knife in my hand as I stepped closer to the old man. When I buried the knife in the back of his neck, there was no scream, just a gasp as he collapsed to the ground. I let him fall as I pulled out the knife and wiped the steel against his clothes to clean them of his foul blood. Then I watched him for any signs of movement. He was not moving, lying there as still as a statue. The first person that raised an alarm was a little boy. In no time, people surrounded the dead body, chattering noisily. Someone called the police. No one noticed me as I turned and walked away from the scene. Little by little, humanity would be gotten rid of, and the earth would return back to its glorious state. I made my way to a Wendy's restaurant by the corner. This time I decided to sit by the window and eat what I had swiped off the counter. I had stopped wondering why no one could see me. It seemed like I was in a bubble that made everything that came close invisible. If I sat on a seat, no one would see the seat anymore. As I munched on the hamburger, my mind floated back to the time the old man waved at me. It had come as a thing of shock. There was no one there with me. Perhaps he was mad and seeing shadows. But what would that make me? The question was one that I had stopped asking myself. I knew who I was. I finished eating and leaned back against the seat, watching people walk past, the sound of their footsteps grating on my ears. With my eyes shut, I imagined a world that was peaceful and calm, serene and beautiful, one devoid of every human. I jumped up from my seat and listened. Sure enough, the sound was still there, getting louder. Standing up did nothing to erase it. It was the footsteps of the old man, the one that I had just ended a few hours ago. No, I mumbled without even realizing that I was speaking. I rarely spoke. There was no one to speak to. The footsteps continued. I hoped I was making a mistake, but I knew I was not. I hardly ever made a mistake with the sounds of footsteps. I heard the sound of the second hand racing around the clock, but none of these sounds drowned out the dragging footsteps that was annoyingly coming closer to where I was. I stared outside through the glass partition, the difference between being inside here and outside there. Sure enough, the old, frail man came around again, his eyes black as ever, the white beard hanging down from his chin. He stopped, turned to stare at me, and waved. Then he continued down the road. My heart froze. His shirt was free of the bloodstains I had seen pooling around him not long ago. How was he still alive? My feet moved fast, taking me through the exit of the restaurant and out into the street. I started after the old man before realizing the knife was already out in my hand again. I moved quickly, almost running, aware that no one could see me until I got close to him. There were scars at his nape, many scars crisscrossing, so much that I could barely count. We got past a barber shop, and I raised my knife. We walked past a toy store, and I still had the knife raised. The old man stopped. I stopped too. The knife was still raised. "You see the scars?" The voice was cold and impersonal, fearless and flat. I swallowed. He was not supposed to see me now. "You keep killing yourself," he said. Then he turned around to look straight into my face. I recognized it now. The eyes, darker than the night. They were mine. I had always loathed it, getting old and frail, dragging myself all over the place. What is this place? How is this happening? What? "You die and die and die again, all by your own hand." Where? What is this? "You are fighting yourself," he said. Then he turned and started walking away. "Stop!" I shouted. It was all so confusing that I saw myself in this man when he was everything I loathed. "Make peace with yourself and your future, Tony. You are 45, and you are not getting any younger." He continued walking down the street. "But how do you know me?" I asked. I needed answers to the many questions bouncing around my head. "I am you. Don't you see?" "I don't. Wait, what is this place?" "Your mind, Tony. Your mind. Try to live sometimes." With that, He continued walking into the darkness. I watched him go, a silhouette, a lone figure bearing so many questions, while I wondered what it was all about. "Try to live sometimes," Dr. Kenzie said, sitting on the sofa facing me. She was young, and I did not feel like strangling her. "You live in your head most of the time. Is it possible that this hate you have for humans is because of the death of your father and the nature of it?" I remained motionless. My father had suffered before he died. It was heartbreaking seeing my hero reduced to that before the end, and I could offer him no help. The good doctor felt that that was why I felt so detached from humanity. That's why I hated them. "Maybe," I said, feeling some of the hate seep away. "We will all die. There is no need hating yourself. We will all grow old and die, and there's nothing wrong with that. So try to make peace with the past facts and move on while there's still life." Things are easier said than done, aren't they? If you're still with me now, tell me, my friend, doesn't the idea of getting old and feeble scare you? All I ordered was a hamburger from Wendy's. This was the beginning of the entire story or another chapter. The delivery man came in and refused to leave. He claimed to like me, and I couldn't deny the attraction I had for him either. Truthfully, I ordered the burger because I knew he would deliver it. It wasn't his first time. He had been delivering my orders since the beginning of the year. It started with small talk, and then we would go a little further and even further. But this time, he confessed his feelings and said he wanted me to go out with him. It felt good, and my heart danced in ripples. At 20, I had only one ex, and the delivery man did not seem like a bad idea for a new boyfriend, even if he was 33. I invited him into my house, and together we devoured the hamburger, or should I say each other. He touched me, and I gave in to the attraction I felt in the contact of his fingertips. He devoured my mouth with more hunger than he did the hamburger. We took our journey to my bedroom, and we had the best time ever rocking and riding. He left and promised to come back later in the night. But when I woke up a few hours later, I found myself handcuffed, sirens blowing outside my house. Beside me, Jack was butchered and naked. I screamed and ran out of the house wondering who killed my new boyfriend and abandoned him on my bed. The cops chased after me and bundled me into their vehicles. My mind was traumatized by the sight I witnessed, but the cops didn't give me a chance to explain or hear anything. Not that I wanted to explain. I needed the full story. Why did I meet a dead Jack rather than the one who confessed he loved me a few hours ago? I wasn't given the chance to mourn. When we got into the station, they asked for my side of the story, and I was glad for the chance to talk, but I couldn't say anything. I didn't know anything. I didn't remember anything. I had slept after Jack stood up to leave in the afternoon, yet the cops said he never left, that he didn't meet anyone else, and he didn't return to Wendy's that afternoon. I found the story absurd because I saw him leave with both my eyes before I closed them to sleep. I argued with the cops, but no one was ready to believe me. I cried and screamed and mourned. He was my first chance at love after my previous boyfriend. Logan, my ex-boyfriend, was also murdered. It was the day after he proposed to me. He promised me heaven and earth and all I ever wanted, but that night I saw him in the arms of another lady. I had a cold and wanted to get some drugs at the pharmacy, and right in front of his house, he lived 2 blocks away from me. He was cuddled up in the embrace of another woman. My heart was broken and shattered and battered by the one man I decided to give my heart to. I was only 18, and it felt unfair that life served me such a cruel joke as my first relationship. I broke up with him over a phone call, and he raced to my house almost immediately. I watched him from outside going into my apartment in search of me. I left the neighborhood, and when I returned in the morning after spending the night at a friend's place, there was a crowd at my house and the dead body of my boyfriend. Someone had reported a break-in at midnight. The cops had found him. He looked helpless with his eyes wide open and the dagger in his stomach. I vomited and cried at his loss. Even if he had betrayed me, my love for him wasn't dead. His murderer was never found, and the case was eventually abandoned. My house was marked as a crime scene, and I had to look for a new place to live. My current house, the new crime scene. The cop was narrating the ordeals Jack, my new dead boyfriend, faced. He was stabbed multiple times in his stomach and groin. His body was butchered afterward. I cried loudly at the narration. I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't interested, but the cops thought I was the murderer and were irritated at my lack of information. That was the most absurd thing. I loved him. They claimed to find my fingerprints all over his body, and that was perfectly normal because we had sex. They kept me in jail, and I sunk into the ground, overcome by the horrific happenings. The next few days escaped in a rush of my lawyer trying to prove all the circumstantial evidence wrong and to save me from the accusations. He didn't have to do too much. With time, the shreds of evidence turned another angle, and it was proved that I wasn't the murderer. The cops soon realized that Jack wasn't killed in the house, and he indeed left, but was killed outside and later dragged inside. Meanwhile, I never left the house. The security lock on my door was enough proof. I was released, and the cops apologized for my loss, promising to find the murderer and make sure to provide justice. I nodded in agreement and left the station, pained, but happy to leave. Once again, I had to change my house. Perhaps I needed to stop falling in love. I tried to imagine how Jack must have felt when the dagger would have entered his stomach. The utter disbelief in his eyes at the perpetrator, and the pain he felt when he knelt and begged with innocence in his eyes. I tried to imagine the pain when the blade was removed from his stomach and pierced his groin, ripping him of every form of life left. I imagined the multiple times the murderer performed that act, like he was in the middle of a movie. The betrayal Jack must have felt, the regret in his heart. I inhaled and imagined the contentment that must have been in the killer's eyes while dragging the innocent man into my house, through the door I had left open for when Jack would come. I wept at the joy that filled the killer's heart with each cut he made on Jack's body, while making my boyfriend look like a turkey made ready for Thanksgiving. The same joy that filled my heart when I thrust the dagger into Logan's chest 2 years ago. That's why he shouldn't have confessed his love to me. He should have just kept it to himself. But that was okay. He wasn't at fault. I, unfortunately, couldn't keep my desires for flesh and longing to kill lovers to myself either. It started with Logan, and it was okay. As long as the cops would never find out I was the murderer. We sat in the drive-in watching our favorite movie Hannibal. Bryce and I had been dating for over 2 weeks now, and this was our second date. We both loved the coziness of the drive-in and the way it felt more real than the more conventional Netflix people watched these days. Wendy's eatery just around the corner made it quite easy to order some snacks without missing much. We've both seen Hannibal before, but had decided on seeing it again. I need to use, I told Bryce before pressing a kiss on his lips, then jumped out of the car. I crunched, trying not to disturb their movie, but a few people still screamed, "Get out of the way!" when I walked past their car. For those, I stood up, made sure to take my time before strolling to the next car, and on. I reached the restroom, but the crowd outside irked me. I groaned, feeling the pressure in my bladder growing. I'd never been the type to hold it in. I turned, searching for an escape. My eyes rested on the eatery, the light glowing from the signboard. I hurried towards it, crossing to the other side of the street. I pushed open the door. There were only a few people there. Most had already purchased whatever they wanted and headed straight to the drive-in. I rushed to the door, to the left with the sign saying restroom. I don't know how long I spent in there, because I always had a habit of scrolling through my phone once I was in the restroom. But when I stepped out, everything felt different. Wendy's was completely devoid of staff. There was absolutely pin-drop silence. I slowly stepped outside and returned to my car. I was shocked to see the whole field empty, like not a soul was there. Only our car stood at its spot. I hurried towards it only to find it empty too. As I turned my gaze towards the screen, a gush of cold wind blew past my ears. There was something hanging from it. I got closer to the screen and could now make out a lifeless body hanging. I gasped as my brain scrambled to make sense of the whole scene. What's going on? I asked myself. I kept walking closer, my gaze fixed on the body. It hung limply as though someone had done it hastily. I inched closer, the same curiosity driving the rest to stare at the body pushing me towards it. As I reached the front of the drive-in, my heart stopped. My throat suddenly felt parched. The world around me was spinning too fast. Too fast, it didn't make any sense. No! I screamed. My legs crumpled under my weight. All of a sudden, the rope broke and the body fell on the ground. I raced towards it, shaking him hard, tears pooling down my eyes. My whole world was tearing at its seams. Just as I lay sobbing on Bryce's cold body, a deafening laughter boomed from the speakers. My heart pounded in my chest. I stared at Bryce. If he were alive, he would have told me to run. But he was not, and I could not leave him there. I could not leave him dead. I searched desperately for help. Anyone. It was then when I saw him. He stood there, dressed in all black. I blinked, thinking he would disappear, but he was real. As real as Bryce being dead. And he was looking at me. I took a step back, but he remained still. He charged towards me, axe raised. Without thinking, my legs took to motion. I raced back to Wendy's, not sparing a glance to see if he was following behind. Not that I needed it. He was definitely following behind. I could feel him drawing nearer with each second. I pushed open the door, locking it almost immediately with the wiper. My whole body was trembling now, every inch of me pounding hard. I reached for my phone. It slipped off my hand and landed face flat on the floor. The man collided with the glass door. I jerked, a scream of terror escaping me. He watched me. His eyes were filled with callous intent. He grinned, revealing brown teeth. I took a step back, stepping on my phone. His eyes darted to the phone the same time as I did. I reached for the phone just as he slammed the door open with his axe, the glass shattering. A scream escaped my mouth as I raced towards the counter, finding the door to the inner room. It was open. I stepped in, shutting the door from behind with the bolt. I dialed 911. "Hello? Help! Help me!" I cried out. "Someone is trying to kill me!" As I reached beneath the counter to hide myself, my heart stopped. One of the attendants was hiding there too. I'd just led the killer to her. Oh God! I walked to the storage door, pushing it open. I pulled out some flour, tossed it aside, then grabbed the cooking alcohol. I tossed some vegetable oil to the girl. "Heat this," I ordered. She nodded. We waited with bated breath as the door gave way. As he stepped in, I sprayed the alcohol, clicking the lighter simultaneously. Flames burst out of it, disrupting his vision. He swung blind. The blade tore through me, causing me to scream in pain. "Now!" I cried out. Before he realized what was going on, the girl threw the boiling oil over him. He screamed as the hot liquid burned his face. "Run!" I shouted to the girl. He still screamed in agony as we stepped out, racing outside. The police had arrived. "He's in there," the girl said, pointing towards the eatery. The policeman grabbed a hold of me, speaking into his walkie, requesting for an ambulance. "Just put pressure on it," he said once he finished, pressing hold of my stomach bleeding. My strength was wasting away with each passing second, but soon the ambulance arrived. I woke up in the hospital the next day, my vitals normal. Or were they? The killer was behind the bars, but he had taken Bryce away from me, from this world. Life would never be the same again. Red blood cells, other cells. The image rippled through my mind, exactly the way my child was rid of her body parts. I would never know, but I chose to believe she was a girl. The shrill cry of my baby exploded in my ears the way it did every night. I ran towards her, extended my hands, and tried to catch her, but Claire took her even far away. I didn't understand. Weren't mothers supposed to be protective of their children? Her legs were gone now. I watched from afar with a broken heart as the sharp blade terminated the rest of her. I cried in agony. My baby was flushed like she was merely a menstrual flow. The contentment in her mother's eyes as she narrated the story threw jabs of double-edged daggers through my heart. I clung tightly to my chest, trying to put it in place, but a quick breath and it flew out with an exhale. I sprung awake, panting like a 100-meter athlete. Another nightmare. Nightmares that wouldn't have occurred if Claire hadn't confessed her abortion 2 weeks ago, the day before she went missing. Her confession still pricked my heart, still injured me, and made me cry once in a while. Who knew a 45-year-old man could cry due to the loss of his child, a child that wasn't given a chance at life, a chance to love? Perhaps it wouldn't have hurt so badly if I didn't have so much wish and longing for a child in the past 5 years. I had waited since the day I married Claire for the chance to be a father. Yet because she wanted to move up the corporate ladder, she gave up our child at my expense. More than her disappearance, my loss was hurtful. I scampered into the bathroom and washed my face and mouth. I went out to the sitting room and picked up my laptop to write. My editor had called before I went to sleep, and I needed to finish a story soon. And so I wrote. I looked up at the wall clock in my room. It was some minutes before 11 p.m. Claire would enter the house soon. The sitting room was rough, and my laptop was wide open, probably dead. I forgot to plug in the charger before taking this quick nap, and it didn't shut down either. The curtain was still up, and the room was cold. Nylons, packets, and bottles littered the floor. I rubbed my eyes and stretched before standing up to tidy the room. I picked up the plastic bottles and dusted the couch. I washed a few plates by the sink, wiped the kitchen counter clean, and swept the floor of the sitting room. The clock struck 11 p.m. as soon as I was done sweeping. Claire came in through the back door. She was dressed in black pants and a sky blue peplum top. The hatred in my heart burned more. She had a bottle of wine in her hand, my favorite color, my favorite wine. The woman knew how to play her cards. "You're still digging?" she said, and glanced towards the backyard, where I had spent the most parts of my day. "It's for my garden," I answered without interest. She drew closer to me and placed a hand on my cheek. I could see the remorse and pity in her eyes. She killed my child and felt pity for me? A wicked woman indeed. "You need to get over the abortion, Adam. Another child will come, and we will cherish the child together," she whispered on my face, and I hissed. I pushed her hands off, and she walked away towards the kitchen counter. "I'll pour you some wine." I trod after her and flung her hands off our glass, my glass. She screamed. I pushed her away from the kitchen towards the door and outside. "Go away," I hissed. I heard her footsteps retreating, and in a few minutes, the house was surrounded by silence. Soon she came in again, through the back door, and I hissed, annoyed with myself for forgetting to lock it. "I'm sorry," she begged, and I saw it in her eyes. Maybe she sacrificed our baby for her own life, but wasn't willing to sacrifice our relationship, our marriage. I felt sorry for her. I ran towards her and enveloped her in a hug. For the first time since she told the abortion story, my stomach knotted at the thought. "Can we drink the wine now?" she asked, and I nodded. The smile reached her eyes as she disentangled and picked another set of wine glasses from the shelf. She poured our wine, and brought it over to the sofa where I was already seated. She raised her red-filled glass for a toast and said, "To future babies." I puked, but clanked the glass that made the drink spill on my clothes. I jerked back and stood, setting my glass in front of her. She flashed a coy smile, and I went into the room to change my dirtied shirt. I returned in a minute and downed the rest of my glass. Once I took the last drop, the pain began. I called her name, but she walked away from me. Her eyes were cold, and I almost couldn't recognize her. She watched me roll in pain and clench my stomach, my throat, and my joints. I thought I must have looked like my baby would have when the doctor dismembered her with his murder weapon. In the last moments of my life, I jerked and shook and coughed like a car with a faulty engine. I struggled to breathe, and Claire gasped like she'd been holding her breath forever. I thought I heard her mutter, "Mission accomplished." The content in her eyes was louder than when she spoke of the aborted baby. She dragged me effortlessly by the leg to the backyard, towards the ground I had dug all day. She rolled me into it and buried me while I struggled to catch my breath. I was silenced, the same as my child. I punched the end and smiled at myself in victory. Quickly, I saved the file and attached it to my email before sending it to my editor. That was supposed to be enough for now. I stood from where I sat, walked towards the kitchen, and filled a wine glass with some white wine. While sipping from the glass, I took a stroll to the backyard. The whimpers that rang only in my ears from the backyard had gotten even quieter. The backyard was beautiful and full of flowers. No one could ever guess that underneath the flower bed was Claire, my missing wife. I sipped some more wine and relished in the contentment that following writing the murder of my wife in the reversed version, being a victim was a good way to lift guilt. I was the perfect husband, she was the wicked wife, and no one knew that the woman I reported missing was buried alive by me. I chuckled and went back into the house. Some people hated working from home. Not me. I loved it. Between the lack of commuting to and from that downtown fesshole of an office, and not having to listen to Janice talk about her decrepit mom all day, it was pure bliss. I'd also invested a sizable sum into a legendary computer setup some years earlier, and now I was finally going to be able to use it for something other than online shoot-'em-ups. When the call went out that we needed to work from home while the pandemic swept through the country, I actually smiled. That was 3 years ago. Like most town, ours had its fair share of virus cases, but when the rest of the world returned to normal and people started going back to their offices, we stayed put. Why have an office at all? The company executives reasoned, if your workforce can do their jobs from their bedrooms. So that's exactly what we did, day after day. And I loved it. I got my groceries delivered, watched TV when I wanted, and I kept my boss happy by doing just enough actual work to not raise any questions. Some weeks I didn't even leave the house at all. And then came the email from the friendly Human Resources Department. "Dear Jason," it said, "we want you to be among the small group of employees who we are inviting to try a satellite office downtown. For those days when face-to-face interaction would be beneficial, a first session is scheduled for tomorrow, and we'd love for you to attend." I scanned each word again and again before muttering, "Yeah, screw off," to my empty room and replying that while I understood the benefits of face-to-face interaction, I was far more comfortable working from home. The next email wasn't so polite. This time it didn't come from the generic HR email address, but rather from one I hadn't seen before. It was a collection of numbers and letters, but with our usual company domain at the end. And if the address hadn't alarmed me already, the content of the email did. "Jason, you should take up this opportunity. The last thing any of us want is for you to be found alone, dead at your desk, tomorrow at 3. I immediately forwarded the email to Roz, the nosy HR administrator who, until now, would have been the last person I'd talked to about anything. No sooner had I hit send on the email than my phone rang. It was Roz, demanding to know what sort of sick joke I was playing, and whether I knew that simulating fake company emails is a serious offense. Awesome. Thanks, Roz. Helpful as ever, I thought. I tried to put the email to the back of my mind. I got on with my tasks for the day, and as usual, was finishing up just in time for Junk Hunters to start on the TV. It was early afternoon, and I had nothing else on my to-do list, save for a few pre-scheduled emails going out through the afternoon to remind my boss I was still working hard. Around 4 p.m., I scanned through my inbox to see what else had come through while I had been laying on the couch. My eyes stopped at another email from the random address. This time, it was simply addressed to The Slacker. I clicked it open, and my screen glitched for a moment before coming back to normal. Jason, you ran to Roz like a kid running to their mommy, it read. That was a mistake. I can see you, Jason. I can see you in your shitty apartment. I can see the dishes in the sink and the blinds drawn closed. I can see you laying on your couch, watching TV when you say you're working. I can see it all, and I'm not impressed. My first thought was that someone had gotten access to the webcam, which I had kept mounted to the top of my monitor for our morning meetings, where I presented my largely made-up to-do list, making sure it was longer than anyone else's. But that was unplugged. I always unplugged it in the afternoons because I was paranoid about it randomly turning on. So how the hell did this person claim to have seen me? Listen, bud, I replied to the email. I don't know what you think you've seen, but I've got a lot of work to do. So whoever you are, just beat it, okay? An answer came back within seconds. Oh, Jason, it read. You don't get it, do you? I can see you. Right now, in that cracked leather chair with the broken wheel, with that green Nike hoodie with the soup stain on your left elbow. I'm going to give you one last chance to come clean, Jason. Tell your bosses what you really do at home all day, or you'll regret it. I was flustered now. I looked down at the soup stain on my hoodie and the broken wheel on my chair. Every detail had been correct. I scanned the dim surroundings of my apartment, looking for any hidden camera lenses. Hell, I even peered through the blinds to see if anyone had trained a camera on me from outside the building. Nothing. The street outside was as bare as it always was. I was getting angry. Screw you, pal, whoever you are, I wrote. I hope you like watching guys on the internet, because that's probably what gets you off, you pervert. You don't scare me. You're a dime a dozen keyboard warrior. I don't give a shit about you or what you think you've seen. No reply came this time. Minutes watching my email inbox turned to a whole hour. And by the time the sun went down, I chalked the whole thing up to some elaborate prank. Probably Charlie in IT. That guy was always trying to trip me up. By the time I'd heated up some leftover chili, watched a couple of shows on TV, and done a good amount of online gaming, I'd pretty much put it out of my head. I was picturing Charlie sitting in front of his own screen and thinking he'd gotten me good. The prick. I'd show him that I'd figured it out all tomorrow. It was 2 a.m. by the time I went to switch my computer off. As I clicked the icon to power down, my screen glitched again. Nothing happened, so I tried to click the power icon again. And again. And each time, nothing happened. Screw this, I thought, searching underneath the desk for the computer's actual power button. It wasn't recommended, but I was tired. I pressed my finger onto the metallic power button, and suddenly, a surge of electricity spread through me. I tried with all my might to pull my finger away from the button, but it was like I was glued to it, and the pain was unbearable. Every muscle was cramping, every nerve ending was firing. My only sensation was intense pain. I'd do anything for it to be over. As I watched in horror, a new message came up on my computer screen. It looked like an official email from the HR department and contained only a few words. Enroll in the new satellite office as a full-time employee, it said, with boxes for yes and no marked beneath. I looked at the time. 2:59. This was it. I was going to die at the exact time the message had said, unless, with all my remaining strength, I lifted my free arm and jammed my finger down into the Y key. Immediately, I was released. The electrical surge stopped. My finger was released from the power button, and I lay panting on my apartment floor. When I looked up at my screen again, there were 2 fresh emails waiting for me. The first was from the HR department, thanking me for joining the voluntary satellite office scheme and telling me to report there at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The second message was from the same anonymous account as before and simply said, "Thanks for your cooperation, Jason. I'll be watching your performance closely from now on." I did join the office the next morning and have been working from there since this incident. However, I have changed my apartment, and out of fear of getting those creepy emails again, I have chosen not to install any PC at home. Still, sometimes, at exactly 3 in the night, I feel a current running through my body and wake up in sweats. It's terrible. Another blackout. Another video as usual. A scribbled note? Unusual. I sat up from the 2-seater, the only furniture apart from a small stool in the living room. What if I told you the blackout I mentioned wasn't one from electricity, neither general? It was my death to life, technically, and I woke up at that time. Blackout over until it wished to show up again. I glanced at the only wall clock in the room. The time was 9 p.m. The last thing I remembered was coming into the house from my interview at KFC. I squealed, forgetting my predicament for a little while. I got the job to work as a chef. My excitement vanished as my mind finally calculated how long I was gone. It had been 6 hours. I got home by 3 p.m. and woke up in strange clothes and a note. "I'm going. I want to see my mommy." Which fucking mommy? Yet the handwriting seemed too much like mine. I clicked the play button on the video on the laptop placed on the stool. I don't remember purchasing a laptop. I saw myself doing a silly dance in the center of the room. I scrubbed my hair with my nails and bit back tears, frustrated. When the fuck did I do this? After dancing, I disappeared into the kitchen and stood in front of the camera. I didn't have a fucking camera in the house. I never bought one. I couldn't even tell where the camera was. I stared blankly at the screen. I brought the knife to the veins in my left hand. "You're supposed to be dead," I stared into the camera and said, then shut it off. The video died. I screamed. This was new. I had never tried to hurt myself with death in my eyes. It wasn't the first. Neither was it the second. It wasn't the third either. My blackouts started when I was 7. The day after my mommy died, I saw her hang herself in the center of her room. I watched through the keyhole of her door. I fainted and woke up a couple of days later, but the doctor said I had woken up the previous day and screamed at them to kill me. I didn't remember an ounce of it. The blackout stopped for a while. Those were times when I was distressed with life and felt like dying. But once I got hope of life and a dream job, it returned. I scrambled to the bathroom and washed my face, but not without screaming first at the mirror and crying. I got rid of the filthy clothes and threw them in the dustbin. Fuck the blackouts. I had my dream job, and I wasn't about to let it get ruined. And I sure wasn't willing to die. Not for my mom. I hated her. My first day at work was neither good nor bad. The work was tedious and fun. The hustle and bustle brought some life and color to me, and for the first time in 18 years, I didn't feel dull. I thought it was all good until I woke up 12 hours later in my bed, and in the clothes I threw in the trash can the day before, there was a bloody knife in my right hand and a slight cut on my left arm. Did I say slight? I was fucking bleeding. Did I hurt myself? I ran to the bathroom and covered my wound with tissues. I ran out of the house and took a cab to the hospital. While I was at it, I made a phone call to the police station. I told them I was about to be killed and was on my way. After getting my wound stitched and treated, I took another cab to the police station nearest to my house. "I'm Alicia. I called the station about an hour ago," I told the first police officer I met. "Oh, come in. Can you please tell us what happened?" "But I don't know what happened. I was at work by closing time. I visited the toilet and woke up back at home with this cut in my arm and a knife in my hand." The officer blinked at me twice. My story probably made no sense to him. "We'll see what happened. Meanwhile, be careful," he said. I took another cab back home. Time was running out and I had to prepare for work. That was when I found another scribbled note by my bed. "Shouldn't we go to Mommy now, Alicia? Let's die." I screamed and threw my fists at the wall. I didn't want to die. Who was trying to kill me? I placed a call to the police station again, but I was disregarded. The officer told me I went home by myself, and I looked completely sane according to the CCTVs from KFC to my house. He said I didn't have any intruders and that a video of me cutting myself was uploaded on my Instagram account that morning. I shivered. After dropping the call, I opened my phone and my Instagram. It was right there. I was in the center of my bed with the same knife I found in my hand. With a swift drag, I placed a cut and smiled into the camera, wincing in pain. I deleted the video and turned off my phone. What was happening to me? What the fuck were these blackouts? Was I going mad? Maybe the police officer was right and I needed to see a psychiatrist. I shrugged off the feeling and got dressed. Perhaps cutting and frying some chicken would take my mind off work. I was a lady in my prime and was supposed to enjoy life, not be scared of it. I visited a psychiatric hospital by noon. My second day at work was crazy, and I could barely hold a knife. I shook like a chicken when one was placed in front of me. The video of me cutting myself messed with my head so bad that I ran to the hospital. For a while, I believed I was running mad. It didn't take long for the doctor to give his diagnosis. I was so worked up and bent on living that I showed a stranger the videos I saw whenever I woke up and told him about when it started, my abusive mother, and how I hated her, but also hated how she died. I showed him photos of the scribbled notes I had on my phone and cried, "I don't want to die." "It's your personality. Your personality wants to die." "Why?" I sobbed, not understanding a word. "You have a multiple personality disorder. It was created when you watched your mom die. You thought you hated her, but the part of you that loved her ripped out to form a personality of its own. That personality wants to follow your mom to the afterlife." "What am I supposed to do?" "Have a conversation with it and heal." "What is that?" I said, but didn't hear the response. I blacked out. Again. When I woke up later, I was in a white room, laid on a white mattress. The room was void of any form of furniture save the mattress. There was no door, or I couldn't see one or a door handle. There was no window, but the room was well ventilated. I had on my body a white gown that seemed impossible to remove. I screamed. Was I being held hostage at an asylum? A few seconds later, the doctor from before came in. I was too flustered to notice the room actually had a door. It was only without a handle. I ran to him, demanding an explanation. "Are you Alicia or Sarah?" he asked, and my blood turned cold. Sarah was my mother's name. "Sarah is my mother's name," I said, and he sighed. He explained to me that my other personality was also named Sarah. Her triggering factor was my joy. Sarah didn't think I deserved peace and was determined to die. She thought it was wrong that only my mother had to die that day. The doctor said he couldn't let me go for fear that my personality would kill me soon. I sank into the ground and wept. If therapy was needed to live a normal life, I was up for it. I shook my head and he smiled. He walked out and beckoned me to follow him. I did. I was ready to heal. Anyone who didn't love working from home probably did not just know how wonderful it was. It shuts you off from the world. Truly, but the peace that came with knowing you are working in your comfort zone and well relaxed to do whatever you need to do could not be argued by anybody. I had more than enough points to argue it. "Julia, I'm off," my husband yelled from the sitting room before leaving. He was a police officer and had just been called. There was a case they needed him to work on. I was always proud of him. He was smart and knew what to do for every case he somehow got his hands on. I didn't bother yelling back or saying anything since we already discussed it earlier. I already knew he was gone. I was going to lock the door as soon as I was done with packing the laundry I was busy with. "Duke, is that you?" I called back when I heard the door open again. I would not be surprised if he was the one. He always forgot something and needed to come back to get it. I didn't receive any reply. He must not have heard me. I continued with the laundry. I had an important job waiting for me in the next 30 minutes. I had just a few minutes left to finish whatever it was I was doing. I heard the door open and close again. I was sure that my husband must have picked whatever he'd forgot and left. Eventually, after a few minutes, I sat down to face my laptop. I had a few minutes before the job. It was a Zoom call where I was going to have to share ideas for a new position I was applying for. I couldn't rely on more than one job to survive. I needed jobs that I could do from home. Emphasis on the jobs. The call was between two people, the CEO of the company I was interviewing for, according to what I heard. The first thing I could not help but notice when the call started was the resemblance to one of the walls in one of the rooms of my house. I ignored it. It was probably the same person who did the two and was out of ideas before deciding to use something he had used before. Still, I wanted to check the room, but the call had already started. I couldn't possibly do that. It was only going to show that I was not serious about the job I claimed to have desperately needed. The questions and answers went on for a while, until she asked us to take a break. It was weird that she would ask us to, since the meeting was basically questions and answers and was supposed to end. What would have been left was to expect a result from their company. Either way, I could not complain. Anyhow their company ran, I could as well get used to it in case I eventually worked there. I could almost swear that I heard voices in the same room during the interview, but I still ignored it. I was the kind of person who imagined things a lot, and it was probably just my mind and head playing tricks on me. I hoped. "Guess the job's yours if you do what I need you to do." I turned around to the face of the woman I had been talking to on the Zoom call. "Yes, I came in through the door. Don't ask." I wasn't going to. She must have been the one who entered when I thought it was my husband who forgot something. Either way, I waited to hear whatever I had to do. She was the boss of the company, and it was already enough privilege to have her stand in front of me. She smiled at me before going ahead to say what she wanted me to do. "Take off all your clothes and kiss me." I was shocked and disgusted at the sound of it. How was that even possible, to get naked in front of her and kiss her? All because I wanted a job? The questions kept running through my mind. Could I really blame her? I needed a job and found myself in her trap. I was scared of saying no to her. She was in my house and could pull any trick. I didn't know what else she was hiding. I needed another way to communicate what I was feeling to her. Disgust, frustration. How could she even think of asking me such a thing? Did I appear so desperate? I had a child that was sleeping peacefully in the next room. I could not do that to myself for sure, or to my husband as a sign of disrespect. Out! Out of anger, I stood my ground and ordered her out of my house. Where did the confidence come from? I didn't know, but one thing I was sure of was the fact that I wasn't going to be found working for such a person. I'd rather do worse, noble things. "Oh, you shouldn't have yelled. You're going to regret that now." I got scared when she said the sentence. She was confident, which meant she had a plan already. It would have been easier if I could somehow read her mind, but her expression was quite the opposite of whatever she had on her mind. She was all smiles on the outside, but with the words that came out of her mouth, her mind could not be anything less than filthy. She grabbed my neck with so much force that I lost control. My daughter had begun to cry in her room from all the shouting. She couldn't walk yet. I tried to beg her, but she wouldn't hear any of that. She had already started to pull some of my clothing with a wicked smile on her face and a camera placed over my face. She was much stronger than I was. Trying to fight with her was pointless. Was I going to give up my dignity without a fight? "Julia!" I heard my husband's voice before the next sound and the third one that followed. A gunshot, and my daughter changing the gear of her crying to a louder one. I turned around, and the woman was on the floor with her camera. My husband had shot her in the leg. At that point, I could only hope whatever just happened was not going to put my husband in trouble. He could possibly have an advantage, self-defense, if it looked like it. I hugged my husband before going to attend to my daughter, who was crying her eyes out already at that point. What a day. I don't want one, I argued with my husband. Come on, you like their chicken, he told me with the same smile that always made my heartbeat skip. We had been married for 5 years, and were trying for a baby for 3 years. I suggested we see a doctor, and having seen one, the results were far from what I was expecting. My husband and I were both infertile, and adoption was probably the best option for us unless the doctor found something that could be of help later, but without it, we were just as hopeless as anything. He thought chicken was going to be good and would help calm me down. I couldn't argue that I loved chicken, but I also couldn't get it through to him that all I needed was rest, to just lay my head down and make every disturbing thought go away. We spent about 5 minutes at KFC before heading back home. He held my hand all the way and said sweet words to me. He was stronger than I was, and I had no doubts about it. But it was also hard to tell when he was sad, because he never let his pain known, and I couldn't help him when I didn't know he needed help. I tried to talk to him multiple times, but he kept saying that he would let me know if he needed help, which I took off my mind with the hope that I could help him somehow, someday. We got back home and realized that the front door was wide open, with a mysterious black van parked on the other side of the road. "We can't go in. It might be a trap for us," my husband said. "Let's call 911 immediately." He brought out his phone. I wanted to believe he was saying the right thing, but I could not agree. It's our house. It's our responsibility to go in and check. My husband shook his head in disagreement and told me that he didn't feel quite right about it, and the best option was dialing 911. We kept arguing like that for a while, till I heard sirens behind me. He had already dialed it before I got a chance to argue. "Great," I said out loud, and got out of the car. The officers asked if we were all right, and after giving them a confirmation that we were, one of them went inside the house while the other cop stayed outside with us, taking note of anything we told them that was unusual. We called their attention to the van that was parked opposite us. The officer rushed towards it with caution, but moments later returned to tell us that it belonged to our new neighbor. That spiked my interest and made me wonder why our house had been invaded. My husband kept patting me and telling me it was going to be fine, which only helped a little. What I really wanted was sleep. The police officers kept searching and didn't find anything, and eventually told us that whoever it was had probably snuck out before we got back home, but the house was good and nothing was stolen. "That can't be possible. We saw the door opened. They should have clearly taken something," my husband and I said. "You know your house. Let us know if there's anything missing," one of the cops said before they drove off. We were a little bit scared to leave the sitting room after the cops left, but only for a few minutes before I eventually fell asleep in the chair. My husband woke me up a few hours later with a little girl staring at me with her electric blue eyes. She had the most beautiful hair I had ever seen and the prettiest smile. I wanted to run to her, hug her like I would hug my own child, but I was calm and restrained myself. I felt love for her instantly, and I immediately knew that it was the kind of love I wanted to give my kids, assuming I could have them. I found who left the door wide open because we didn't lock it before leaving for the doctor's appointment, my husband said and pointed at the child. I smiled and watched as the child looked around with amazement in her eyes. She looked like someone who didn't say a lot or just refused to talk, and I left her like that to talk to my husband aside. He told me that the child had told them that her parents were dead. She was just 5 years old and was running from the person that was in charge of her because he kept hitting her. I felt pity for her and wanted to adopt her immediately. I wanted to show her the love she had never had before, but she was gone as soon as my husband and I got back to the dining room. She only ate the food my husband had put in front of her and left a messy table behind. She left the door open, and as soon as I ran out, I saw her at a distance walking away. I yelled as loud as I could to call her, but she did not budge and didn't turn around. I went back inside and noticed that my husband had blood all over him and was stuck to a chair he couldn't get up from. There was broken glass on the floor, and the more I tried to get him off the chair, the more he winced in pain. She put glass on the chair because she knew one of us was going to sit on it. She didn't come to us so that we would feel she was cute. She came because she wanted to injure someone. Damn it, this is not what I need right now, my husband cried. I felt betrayed and immediately wished that I did not want children so much. If a child could have thought of that, it was clear that the mind of such a child, or any child, was capable of thinking or doing much worse. I apologized to my husband and waited for the 911 call I had placed earlier to arrive. The same men who were in the team that we called earlier came again and were shocked at what they saw. They made jokes about it and said it was clearly not our lucky day. I didn't know the name of the child and I couldn't find her. I knew she also needed help, but I was willing to deal with her no matter how much it took from people to call me mean. If as a child she could do that, she was going to do much worse if the act was not curbed. I promised myself to find her and help her in the best way I could before she was going to do it to another family. I entered the car with my husband and headed for the hospital with the officers. We should have sat down to eat the chicken at KFC. All this could have been avoided. I made a side comment. My husband laughed and squeezed my hand.